Once again, good day to all of us. Now, what a touching session we had from the last two presenters, taking us all the way from the hinterlands of Papua New Guinea, Anga province, to the tip of PNG. Why don't we give a round of applause? Yeah, to them. Thank you. All right, I'm Theo Michael from the School of Business, particularly Applied Economics. So I'll be presenting on behalf of my two other co-authors, Ethu Lugemba and Professor Sarat Dasanayaka. So this, basically it's a case study focused on factors, issues affecting food security in Papua New Guinea, particularly in Lae. So I will be brief, so not to bog you down. All right, so just a brief background. I know we all aware of this. Food security obviously remains a major development challenge in Papua New Guinea. Now, that's taking into consideration the population explosion. We have a very high growth rate in Papua New Guinea, and we are not able to provide for the growing population. That's the reason why it will always remain a challenge. Urban households increasingly rely on purchased food. We have deviated from what used to be the food processing or producing mechanism. We rely on land initially. Now that's not the case. We depend on produced food in the urban areas. So rising food price, inflation for that matter, unemployment, and a rapid urbanization have increased vulnerability to food insecurity. Now, Lae City, as the PNG's industrial hub, amongst other provincial centers, presents an important case for studying urban food security. So these are a few of the research questions we have came up with. Now, most of it, obviously, if you look through, they are all socio-economic factors. So we'd like to bring to the end, at the policy level, how we can design policies to improve food security in the country, taking into consideration the socio-economic factors. So the research questions, number one, what factors influence urban food security in Lae? Obviously, there are many, but the focus is on income, employment, education, and household size, and how that affects food access. Now, key term here to take note, access. So what role does household purchasing power play in food security? How does food access influence household food security? And what policy interventions can we use to improve urban food security? So that draws me down to the research objectives, three main objectives. Number one, what are those socio-economic factors that influence food security? Number two, how do income, again, employment, education, and household size affect food access? And the third and the last one is, what role does purchasing power, obviously a very important variable here, play in food security? Now, moving on to the theoretical framework. Now we take into consideration, there are a number of them here, you can see, as you can see. Now, if you look at the first two, which is food availability and entitlement. When we basically talk about availability, from the availability perspective, we are basically looking at supply. Now, if you go down that pathway, you are referring to what agricultural production can produce. However, that's not only the case. We also have issues with excess. Excess comes along with the qualities, the status, socioeconomic status of individual households, whether they are below the poverty line, or how income is distributed amongst the society, within the society. Sustainable livelihoods basically looks at the individual households and their ownership of assets. Basically a holistic approach. When we talk about political economy, we are basically referring to the structural inequalities at the macroeconomic level, the power relations. Capability approach basically looks at human well-being. Irrespective of the culture and ethical races you have the right to survive. Vulnerability and resilience, how our people cope with the natural challenges that is facing the society. Whether we like it or not, we are faced with the challenges to cope with every day. Systems theory basically talks about food system, integrated analysis, how do we tackle the challenges we have with the up and coming opportunities that are presented before us. Human rights approach or framework basically looks at the right of individual people to have a meal 3 times a day. And that's our basic right. And we can't deny that. All right, so bringing those theories into perspective, excuse me. So now that we have established our theoretical lenses, now let's look at how we have organized these concepts into our crucial research model. So we have 5 key variables here. Number 1, how household income affect food security. Number 2, employment status. Number 3, education level. Number 4, you can be whatever level you have, but you still survive, you still eat food. But those factors definitely have some impact on how you have access to daily survival needs. And here, food. Market access, basically looking at the opportunity. Do we have the opportunity that's reserved for all our citizens, irrespective of whether they are grade 12, grade 10, or a university graduate? They still have need, and that's their right to have access to market. So those are the key variables that we have. So we try to use those using econometric models to connect, to see how they correlate to food accessibility within Lae City. It's a case study. Very important variable to take note here is the mediation variable, which is access to food, H6. All right, so basically the methodology we used. Now the study basically adopted a mixed method approach, all right? Focused on Lae. We used stratified sampling tactic basically to avoid biasness. And the total sample population that we focused on were about 87 households using structured questionnaires. Additionally, to triangulate the research approach, we use surveys, interviews from key interviews and secondary sources. The data collected, we analyzed using descriptive statistics and Power BI. If you don't like it, these are tools used in analysis. All right, so now let me not bog you down with all this. The important thing that we found out in here, the hypotheses were that the H1, the first 5 hypotheses, H1, those key variables I mentioned earlier, to H5, focused on the direct determinants of food security. The final hypothesis, which is H6, is the most crucial for understanding the underlying mechanics. Sorry, I'm not taking you in an econometric class here. Sorry, forgive me for that. So, again, it suggests that socioeconomic status, such as income, employment, education, does not exist in a vacuum, no. Instead, these variables enhance food security primarily by strengthening an individual's purchasing power. All right? Those key independent variables. They enable one very important thing, cross-cutting right across, whether you are a grade 12 or a university graduate, a professor or not. One very important thing is your purchasing power. All right? Do we have the purchasing power to provide what is needed for the family 3 times a day? Or whichever way you put it. All right, so they don't operate independently. Let me just move on in the interest of time. All right, so the study encompasses a total of, as I mentioned earlier, 87 households. The sample is composed of 65.5% male-headed households, okay, and 34.5% female-headed households. Out of those, the 87 total sample informants. So a significant portion of the respondents possess tertiary education qualification, accounting for about 82% of the sample. In other words, most of the 87 households interviewed or being part of the research informants were educated. They have some form of education, and about 82% of it. All right, the employment landscape, the employment status of the sample reveals about 66.7 are employed, 21.8% are self-employed. So in some form, they have a way to earn living and income. All right, let's move on to the key findings. All right, so here. So the data this data basically provides a quantitative snapshot of the households in the study area. All right, so the average household size is about 5 members, and I think that's correlates or resonates with the current census. Average household can be more than that, can be less than that, but on average, out of this 87%, it's about 5 in a family or in a house. All right, so the mean monthly income, which is about 1,300, with an average monthly food expenditure of about 300 to 500 kina per month. So the mean food excess is reported at 86%. Well, so what is it? So generally, what that means is that this finding suggests that on average, the households surveyed maintain relatively good food access and moderate income level. That's just a snapshot of the statistical findings. All right, so the analysis. All right, so the study utilizes descriptive statistics, as I mentioned earlier. We have one limitation. The limitation is that we can't use logistic regression. Why? Because of this limitation, because of the high skewness of data, meaning about 98.85% of the sample household were classified as food secure. Only 1.5% of the household in the sample were classified as food insecure. So at the present stage, the analysis is grounded in descriptive evidence and supporting statistical tests. Let me move on. All right, so the vast majority of the surveyed household at 98.9% were classified as food secure, meaning they have access to food. Now there's one very important point here, coping mechanism. So, but yet, when faced with challenges, borrowing food emerged as a commonly utilized strategy among the household. Well, obviously in Melanesian society, we call it one-talk system. But that's not one-talk system, it's a safety net of survival. I mean for survival, thank you. All right, so what are our findings? I'll just briefly run through. Now, to summarize the core causal relationship identified in our study, we see a clear interconnected pathway. Now, number one is that education improves employment, obviously, that's true, which in turn boosts income and purchasing power, ultimately securing better food access for households. Each of these components, education, income, employment, does not act in isolation, no. They are reinforcing mechanisms that collectively strengthen household food security. So, by understanding these dependencies, we can better appreciate the interventions. Supporting education and job creation are essentially interventions in food security itself. And that's basically zooming down to policy orientation. All right, so building on our previous findings, this slide basically highlights the impact of household composition and their survival tactics. So as shown, larger households face intensified resource pressure, which directly hampers their food security status. Furthermore, the prevalence of copying strategies, particularly stands at about 72.4%, meaning that of household, about 72.4% of the household rely on borrowing food. We can have a paid job, but in Papua New Guinea, unpredictable times comes our way. And the last resort we have is to rely on your next neighbor, so you have good relationship. All right, so now I'm about to conclude. No, this is not necessary, let's move on. Summary findings. Again, the socio-economic chain. Education is identified as the fundamental driver. So when we talk about policy, where do we start? So that we go down the rightful pathway to meaningfully impact the livelihood of our people. So education is identified as the foundational driver as it improves employment opportunities. Employment subsequently serves as a mechanism to increase household income. This increased income then directly improves food access. And finally, improved food access is the primary factor that boosts overall food security. And I salute Melen Bay people. You are exceptionally doing really great. Now, let's look at the demographic aspect of the study. So the study confirms that larger households encounter greater food security challenges. So to conclude, the evidence suggests that food access serves as a critical pathway or mediator that links a household's broader socioeconomic conditions to its final food security outcomes. Last two more slides. Conclusion. So this research confirms that urban food security in Lae is primarily driven by socioeconomic factors. We do have other factors that affect food insecurity in Lae, but according to the research, that's what we found out. So variables such as income, education, employment, and household size collectively shape a household's ability to access food. Food access is identified as the critical mechanism linking socioeconomic status to food security outcomes. Enhancing household purchasing power is therefore essential for sustainable food security improvements. What are our policy recommendations? So based on the research finding, it is recommended to prioritize creating employment for youth and women, expanding vocational training for those left out and flushed out of the system, and promoting gender-inclusive economic policies. Invest in transport, which is obviously true, and market infrastructures. Opportunity. Now, next week we'll be having a visit, a team from IPA, trying to review this reserve activity list for Papua New Guineans. So I think it's in time. So they're trying to review what is supposed to be reserved for PNGians and what is supposed to be left open for our friends from outside. So invest in transport and market infrastructure, implement targeted food assistance or cash transfer programs, and support urban agriculture. We have this controversial issue going on social media about this 200 million kina credit enhancement scheme loan. There's a lot of political good stories around there, but that's not interesting here, so let's just move on. Anyway, to conclude, so to place our specific study on Lae City within a wider context, this final slide here outlines the 10 common research areas currently being pursued by Applied Economics section. So these are some of the areas we're working on just to help contribute in policy development. I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Teo. I'll open the floor now. First of all, I'd just like to thank the three speakers. It was a really interesting session. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a great session across food security and particularly how